think that Jelani will ever ask Israel to get back to this so-called borders, whatever borders it has, from the infiltration it has done as of now?
Well, whether he does or ask or not, the question is, will he do anything about it? You see, Jelani is a very shrewd man. He has many years of hard fight behind him, and he is certainly good at bidding his time and making allies when he needs to and getting rid of the people who are becoming a problem for him. The Americans also have been saying, well, conditionally, we will start lifting some of the sanctions and we'll get you some help. Because the Americans have been playing this long strategic game of basically making deals with so-called radical Islamists. They have done it in Bangladesh. They have done it in Afghanistan with the Taliban. They have now done it in Syria.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We are live from New Delhi and we are going to talk about what would be the impact of Trump on Israel and the Middle East policy. And this is Middle East Insights. My name is Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary. And today we have, and I'm doing my level best. I'm pronouncing our guest name, not very correctly, but I'll try. Come Carpentier de Gourdon, who is currently the convener of the Editorial Board of the World Affairs Journal, a quarterly publication dedicated to international issues, sponsored by the Kapoor Surya Foundation. He shares his time between India, France, Italy, and Switzerland. You should know where all these countries are in the map. And he has lived and traveled in more than 50 countries on 4 continents. He's like a geographer, you know. He's also a distinguished fellow of the India Foundation, a leading think tank forum in New Delhi, and he provides periodic consulting services to various companies and foundations in India and Europe. He is an associate of the International Institute for Social and Economic Studies, Vienna, in Austria, and of the Exopolitics Institute, USA. Come Carpentier is the author of several books and a contributor to several others. He also is very active on YouTube with his podcast. You should check them out. He has written some 200 articles, essays, and you have not even read 200 articles till now, and papers, and published in diverse journals, seminar proceedings, magazines, newspapers on many topics related to world history, Western and Eastern philosophies, religions, to, in fact, geopolitical, strategic and social issues, arts, comparative literature. His latest titles are From India to Infinity, Memories of 101 Moons, An Indian Odyssey, along with A Shining City on a Hill, Novo Sordo Secularum. He is the co-editor with Dr. Kapil Vatsayayan of A Pilgrim Across Worlds, Remembering Ramundo Panikkar. So with this, sir, I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to Middle East Insights. And I'll just strike the nail on its head. What do you think? The ceasefire is going to happen between Israel and Hamas?
First, good evening, and thank you for inviting me on your podcast. You are doing something that very few people are doing, I think, in India, which is covering that very tormented region called West Asia or the Middle East. As far as the ceasefires, it seems there are good news, and Trump has just said that in his usual enthusiastic style, that there will be, Hamas and Israel will shake hands, which appears almost incredible given the situation and given what has happened in the last several months. In fact, in the last almost year and a half.
And
But
yeah.
yeah.
So do you think that, but the far-right Israeli group is having a meltdown?
I don't know. There is a lot of dissension in Israel as everywhere else because, on the one hand, the far right wants things that are probably unachievable, as does Hamas. So at some point, you have to give up the rhetoric and settle down and try to achieve something that may not be very satisfying to either party, but that is the only possible outcome. And Trump, in that sense, is a very, very pragmatic and transactional leader. He is quite capable of embracing somebody and slapping him next minute and saying that I like you, but I just want you to do this, otherwise you are going to have a hellish time with me. And that's what he, by the way, said to a number of people, including European leaders, including Mr. Trudeau in Canada, and including which is even more surprising, Prime Minister Netanyahu. Because if you follow I would say, the evolution of the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu and Israel in general, it is not the completely submissive attitude that some other US statesmen have had, including our own Mr. Blinken. It is a very sort of unpredictable attitude, which sometimes denotes discomfort on the part of Trump. There are certain things he doesn't like about Netanyahu in particular. And in fact, you might say he doesn't like him at all because he recently endorsed a very incendiary statement by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who had called Netanyahu something which I can't repeat on this channel. But clearly, Trump feels that Netanyahu is a burden and a nuisance, and he wants to push him aside. On the other hand, he has often professed his complete loyalty to the cause of Israeli security and to Israeli-US relations, which every politician in the US, let's say every successful politician, has to do, because it's part of the protocol that if you are a successful US politician, you have to be the closest friend of Israel. Otherwise, you get in trouble with your funding, with your public relations, and with a number of other things that you need. So Trump is going by the rules, but he's also showing some rebelliousness. And clearly, his attitude to Israel is, again, as to everyone else, very transactional. It's like, well, what does Israel represent? It's 10 million people, the size of New Jersey or Hungary. It's a country that depends almost entirely on us for its defense. It cannot defend itself by itself. And we can't get much out of it because it doesn't have resources. And in fact, the US Army has often complained, the US military complex has often complained that Israel is taking undue advantage of its closeness to essentially take technologies that it doesn't pay for and that it develops and sometimes uses to rival the US in other markets. So all that is not lost on Trump. And I think he's going to give Israel a bit of tough love, saying you really have to behave yourselves. You cannot allow anything to happen on the pretext that you are entitled to defense, which I agree to, but you also have to check with us. And you cannot involve us in your fights, particularly when you want us to attack Iran, just like you wanted us to attack Iraq, which we did with very unfortunate results. And I think Trump, in that sense, is quietly reading the riot act to the Israeli government. We'll see now what happens.
Yeah, and but talking about Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the way he, forced everything. He talked about Obama ordering CIA in 2011 to overthrow Assad. He talked about, US invading Iraq because of Netanyahu and then calling him all the, terminologies. But one thing which is very clear is also the generational shift which is there between Biden's administration and his core team. Most of them who call themselves, including Biden, a self-declared Zionist because they have the memory of the Holocaust and so much. At the same time, the younger, like Vance, is a millennial, JD Vance. He also hates cats and he hates childless people. But anyway, so Mark Rubio and others, Tulsi Gabbard, they are younger, comparatively younger folks who are coming in Trump's cabinet. Do you think this generational shift will have any pressure on Trump, though nothing has pressure on him, though?
I think he's trying to listen to the mood, which is the feature of a good politician. Listen to the mood of much of his electorate, and a lot of his electorate is primarily concerned about the future of America and their own well-being, economic survival, or prosperity. And at this point, for them, for most of those people, Israel is certainly not a priority. And lots of liberal Jews are also somewhat skeptical about the way Israel is going. So Trump is obviously tuning into this and saying America first. And since I'm such a good friend of Israel and I even have Jews in my family, I don't have any guilt feeling. And therefore, I have nothing to atone for. It's very interesting if when he was taken to the Yad Vashem Memorial in Israel, when he was during his first term, he also had a very unusual reaction. You know, there was no expression of contrition, or he looked like, well, it's a very interesting to visit, you know, like a tourist experience. But that is Trump. You know, sometimes he appears to be totally devoid of sentiments, of feelings. And at other times he is gushing, but then you don't quite know why. Probably because somebody praised him and he's happy about it. So there is a very complex personality surrounded by people who have very different views, who are generally very pro-Israeli and not pro-Arab, except for the fact that there is a lot of business in the Arab world, particularly in the Gulf. And there is the interest in what Trump, of course, started, which is the Abraham Accords. So in other words, if you can once and for all manage to reconcile willy-nilly some of the important Arab countries with Israel and make them collaborate and do business, why not? You know, that would be the best. Otherwise, it's just a huge waste of money, reputation, and also a major security risk for the US to keep opposing tooth and nail countries like Iran today, of course, Syria until a few weeks ago, and Turkey tomorrow, you know, which is also turning out to be a very contentious partner. So I think that from that viewpoint, you can expect a shift, you know, the long-planned pivot to the Indo-Pacific, which has been talked about for the last 20 years. And I think Trump is really going to do it because his concern now is to make sure China does not crush the US economy, which is happening steadily, and that he manages to work out a modus vivendi in which China doesn't become number one and yet is not drawn into an actual military confrontation with the US and its allies. I think this seems to be Trump's vision of what should happen.
I mean, like I heard at some sources saying that if the TikTok sells its ownership to Elon Musk instead of ByteDance, they would not censor TikTok. Nevertheless, one thing which is what I really don't understand is why was Biden, like 123 hostages where there was a certain kind of hostage negotiation in November 23, like, you know, just after October 23. Why did it take Biden administration so long, like 14 months, to have another kind of ceasefire, hostage negotiation, truce, whatever they want to call it?
That remains a mystery until some more information is disclosed. But I suspect Biden was out of his depth. He was struggling for breath and trying to win a nomination for his own re-election. And definitely Netanyahu was dragging his feet and playing truant because Netanyahu was not really interested in releasing the hostages. He was interested in keeping the conflict going to the point where he could crush Hamas, possibly Hezbollah, possibly Syria, and therefore win the crown as the savior of Israel, which would possibly save him from the legal trouble he has been in for a long time. So this was not a priority for Netanyahu. You know, he's an extremely cynical person, and hostages were probably lost to him as far as he was concerned. Even if he could save a few, it would not really impact the longer-term future of the region. Therefore, his focus was on trying to somehow squeeze Hamas out of existence and possibly find a way of annihilating Gaza as a resistance point. Now, you might say he has achieved some kind of short-term or medium-term success because Hamas is not able to carry out any major operation. By the way, I'm not sure it ever was. Hezbollah is nursing its wounds and will take some time to recover. Iran is on the back foot, but then Iran also was overextended. So Iran perhaps is in a way stronger now, at least as far as defending its territory and pursuing its nuclear program if it wants to. And I think this has come out very clearly in the latest reports about Iranian military drills and the videos of Iran's secret missile cities deep underground, which show that Iran could actually rain literally a storm of ever more modern missiles on Israel and on other regions. Now, the interesting, of course, element is also the Syrian change of guard, because you might say this was a surprise to almost everybody. And it seems that the fall of the Assad regime was triggered by a very important meeting that took place between the chiefs of security services, the national intelligence and security of Turkey and Israel. And these two countries seem to have agreed at that time to essentially give a push for the overthrow of Assad. And yet again, you see, I believe the reason why neither Iran nor Russia were particularly keen this time to defend Assad, apart from their own internal problems, is that Assad was known to be pretty much without control over Syria. So there was not too much he could do for either of his allies. And on top of that, the Assad system, the Assad government had been penetrated for many years completely by the Israeli and American intelligence services, not to mention the Turkish intelligence services. Therefore, whatever happened in Syria was immediately relayed to Israel and immediately relayed to the United States. And as a result, some of the attacks that Israel carried out on the leadership of Hezbollah were probably led by intelligence leaks from the Syrian intelligence service. Whether they were overheard or whether somebody passed on the information, there is no question that some of the top leaders of Hezbollah were killed, and possibly even the head of Hamas, who was killed in Iran. Of course, Iran is also penetrated by Israeli intelligence. But the fact is that Syria had become a sort of a burden and an unreliable ally, if you could call them an ally. Therefore, they probably said, well, since the Americans are very keen to change that system, we are going to try to work with the new people and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, this perspective that intelligence was infiltrated from Syrian army and Syrian administration towards the pager attacks on Hezbollah on 17th, 18th of September last year. But all of that is there in the news. And one thing which yesterday, day before, I watched Jolani's, there's a massive PR machinery working to make him look very Western and modern and, very like a neo-Arab or whatever that means. But one thing which in a 16-minute long interview that he gave, or more than that, he talked a lot about fatigue and how happy it is to see a father meeting his son after 15 years, or a brother seeing his family alive after 13 years. What he doesn't really talk about, I'm not even talking about blurring the photo or not handshaking with the German foreign minister. What he doesn't talk about is how the prisoners were treated within Idlib. He doesn't talk about that. He doesn't talk about, and he has said very clearly that whether Israel is strong or weak, we are never going to attack it. So it doesn't really, technically, the kind of, the political selections, for example, the Lebanese president, Syria, all of that makes sense when you see the map of Middle East changing in terms of geopolitics. But do you think that Jolani, because we're talking about Syria, do you think that Jolani will ever ask Israel to get back to this so-called borders, whatever borders it has, from the infiltration it has done as of now?
Well, whether he does or ask or not, the question is, will he do anything about it? You see, Jolani is a very shrewd man. He has many years of hard fight behind him. And he is certainly good at bidding his time and making allies when he needs to and getting rid of the people who are becoming a problem for him. So right now he needs Western support. And of course, the Americans and the Europeans have pretty much jumped saying we'll give you all you want to help you, especially the Europeans for some reason. But the Americans also have been saying, well, conditionally, we will start lifting some of the sanctions and we'll get you some help. Because the Americans have been playing this long strategic game of basically making deals with so-called radical Islamists. They have done it in Bangladesh. They have done it in Afghanistan with the Taliban. They have now done it in Syria. And the game seems to be that these people can be won over by a combination of money and surveillance and threat. If they misbehave, we will find ways of getting rid of them. But in the meantime, they have reasons to want our support, and we will gradually detach them, or at least try to detach them from Russia and China. So that has certainly been the reason for the American preference for Giuliani, or al-Shara, as he's called now, over Assad, who Assad had remained staunchly, at least on the surface, pro-Russian for all sorts of personal and political reasons. And therefore, he was definitely not a pliable partner as far, for example, as the project of the IMEC. See, because the IMEC was supposed to go through Jordan, but if Syria becomes friendly to the West, then Syria can be the ideal passageway for the IMEC. And from there, of course, you go to Israel and that sort of thing, which, by the way, to my mind, explains why several regional powers were interested in disrupting Syria and Israel, because they didn't want the IMEC to ignore them. You see, Turkey wants IMEC to go through its territory, and Iran doesn't like the idea of being bypassed. So there are all these regional rivalries playing. But this being said, I think al-Shara is at this point an unknown number. He's a cipher. And he, at some point, in my view, will have to make the call for recovering the integrity of Syrian territory, even though Islamists traditionally do not think so much in terms of national borders, because they think in terms of Ummah, and particularly the connections between Syria and Iraq are very strong at all sorts of ethnic and cultural and linguistic and economic levels. Therefore, you wouldn't expect al-Shara to be so concerned about the borders of Syria, but of course, he cannot tolerate Islamic land to be annexed by the Israelis, and he has a strong legal claim. So his first goal is to try to keep the country together, avoid it splitting up, because we know that the Americans are playing with the Kurds in the northeast, and the Turks are hell-bent on destroying that Kurdish power in the northeast, because it provides a sort of a strategic depth to the PKK in Turkey. Therefore, the Turks and the Americans are on opposite sides. But the Americans are definitely also interested in keeping some, safeguards, some security in Syria for themselves by saying, if the government of Syria does not do what we want, then we can certainly trigger a new insurrection among the Kurds. And in parallel, the Russians are also keeping their stake in the northwest of Syria, where they have a strong traditional bond with Alawi. And if the Alawites get Russian support, they might break away from Syria effectively, which would deprive Syria of its access to the Mediterranean Sea. So al-Shara has a lot on his plate. He has to try to avoid the country from disintegrating. And that's why for now he's playing Mr. Nice Guy, and that is something which he was expected to do, because let's face it, the Americans have groomed a number of those people in the past. They groomed al-Baghdadi, they groomed some other people we know about in Afghanistan, and so, the same game is being played in Syria.
Yeah, and one thing which when it talks about grooming, for example, going back to the ceasefire, so Hamas supposedly 1 hour or 2 hours back has, though not officially, Hamas has accepted the deal. We don't know, because we'll get to know by the end of the week. the military head right now of Hamas in Gaza is Mohammed Sinwar, who's a hardcore anti-Semite. Though anti-Semitism has many meanings, and every meaning. But now he believes in the Jewish curse that every family is born to kill a Jew. That kind of narrative, and he's very hardcore militant. So even though he doesn't have a lot of mileage as of now in terms of support, and even Nasrallah's son has said that he has nothing to do with Hezbollah anymore. What I find very weird is that do you think that Palestinian Authority would want to govern over Gaza after Hamas is made to forcibly withdraw? Or will Israel take over all of it under the name of Eretz Israel?
It seems to me that Israel will definitely want to have some kind of control over it, whether it's through some proxy or not. Because the Palestinian Authority is very weakened. They cannot control their own population in the West Bank, and Israel is pushing very hard to weaken and sort of nip in the bud any insurrection in the West Bank. And of course, Hamas is a thorn on the side of the Palestinian Liberation Organization because it has never been on the same wavelength, which, by the way, is what Netanyahu liked about it, because keeping the Palestinians divided is an asset for Israeli security. So I doubt that the Palestinian Liberation or the Palestinian Authority will really vie for control over Gaza because, number one, it's not sure how many people will remain in Gaza and under what sort of control they will be. It will probably be a very, very tight control because Israel will certainly not want to have a new episode with tunnels and bombings and rockets and, that escalation. So, Gaza is like a sort of a fish tank. It's overpopulated, it's deprived of resources, and yet it was able to fund its reconstruction thanks to Arab and European supporters, and it was able to rebuild its military system. Now, I don't think that will happen again, at least not in the foreseeable future. Of course, what Israel has to deal with now is its own internal problems, which have grown and which are also tearing at the fabric of the state. So that's something which will happen. Whatever Gaza becomes, Israel will have to focus on its own political evolution because it is increasingly dominated by extremist elements who are led by sort of a biblical zeal and are not always mindful of realities on the ground, who believe that the prophecies will come true and the Messiah will come and rule over them and perhaps over the world. And that does not incite people like Smotrich or other ministers in the Netanyahu cabinet to take a realistic and a humane perspective.
Yeah, I think right now, as we speak, Smotrich and Netanyahu are meeting each other because Ben Gvir went and had a complete meltdown today and that he's going to resign and all of that. Smotrich has, because they have also a budget approval meeting going on. So but let's see what happens. But coming to the very basic question, what do you think Netanyahu is not going to the inauguration of Trump anymore? And he might blame that, okay, he's recovering from prostate cancer and but that's why he's not going. But anyway, there is a certain kind of friction that has developed because of Jeffrey Sachs. Now, what do you think? Because Trump is also doing it. Yesterday, he posted on Truth Social a conversation between him and Obama. And that was funny as hell. But the point is that what do you think will be the relation between CIA and Mossad now, with the friction between the political parties and the political leaders?
Well, CIA is a state unto itself, and it's also its own world. So there are all sorts of tendencies within CIA, and it's not clear that the head of the CIA can always impose a uniform direction within its staff. So there will be elements playing their own games. And as you know, on top of that, you have the national security chief, who is now, of course, Tulsi Gabbard. And one doesn't know if she'll be able to take control of these various agencies, which often lock horns. So I have a feeling that the CIA and the Mossad will keep their close relation mixed with a suspicious, sort of attitude about the fact that nobody should hide what they know from the other. And of course, both keep secrets from each other. So that is always what leads to tensions. But in the case of Trump, I think he personally feels slighted by Netanyahu because Netanyahu rushed to congratulate Biden when Trump was still claiming victory in 2020. And he feels that is a personal betrayal. And he said so. He said, he betrayed me. That's why when Trump was campaigning in the US last year and Netanyahu wanted to meet him, he said, well, listen, if you want to meet me, just come over to Mar-a-Lago. And so, for a sitting prime minister to go and have to travel to see a former president, then, of course, Trump told him, listen, do what you need to do for Israel's sake, but do it quickly. And by the time I come to power, I want all this nonsense to be over. So that was a language that Netanyahu is not used to listening to in America. It's normally he gets a much more obsequious welcome, even from somebody like Biden, who hates him too. But Biden is always very careful. The Democrats are a very strange situation because on the one hand, they have a very strong left wing, which is anti-Israeli and pro-Palestinian. But then on the other, they are also extremely submissive to Israeli demands, So the Republicans, they have a lot of very wealthy conservative Jews among their supporters. But as a result, some of those American very wealthy Jews, they don't necessarily have great regard for Israelis. They see them as these sort of poor younger brothers. And they feel that they have the real power because they sit in America, they control billions, they have the state at their command. And for them, Israel is just a tiny state, which is struggling to survive among Arabs. So you can expect that superiority complex from the rich Jewish supporters of Trump to have influenced him as well.
Yeah, and the most interesting fact is that there's so much of, the cognitive dissonance within the Democrats and within the Republicans themselves. Like, for example, I don't know how to answer when I was asked yesterday that what do you think Democrats and Republicans, how are they going to deal with Israel and the foreign policy? And I said, it doesn't matter because IPEC controls both of them. And the interesting thing is that I do appreciate the fact that IPEC tracker exists in US. We don't have that kind of tracking mechanism. So that is something, and what they do is every time any Senate or Congressperson says that I support Israel, they track the amount of money that they have been given by the lobby group. But apart from that, if we talk about everything cannot be just blamed on IPEC. What do you think are the inherent problems in the Republicans and Democrats when it comes to understanding the Middle East properly?
If you ask me, I think anybody will answer who knows the situation will probably answer like I will, which is that Americans, by and large, have a very poor understanding of the rest of the world. So the Middle East, which is even more complicated and troublesome than other parts of the planet, are clearly a mystery for most of them. So on the one hand, they are quite willing to accept conservative feudal monarchies because it's good for business, easy to deal with the top man and all that. So democracy is not really, calling card because you don't want these countries to become hostage to political parties and etc., which might change the tune. So by and large, the Middle East is a place where the Americans have felt they had very strong interest because of the reserves in oil and gas. And by having their hand on the spigot of oil and gas, they can influence other parts of the world. Remember the famous case of the petrodollar. The petrodollar was saved by Kissinger and the team that served under Nixon at the time, because it enabled the dollar to de-link from gold and keep its status as a global reserve currency by saying if you need oil and gas and other forms of energy, you have to pay in dollars. So that Saudi Arabia was the key in that to that agreement. Therefore, in the mind of the Americans, that whole region, whether it's Turkey because of its position on the east flank of NATO, or whether it is Saudi Arabia, not to mention Iran, which used to be a strong ally and which became a very big worry. All that is part of the priority for the US, and therefore Israel is right at the core of it, as they say, the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the US. But as we can see now, they are more worried about Far East because of the economic growth and of the formidable power that is being developed over there. So the increasing concern is how do we handle China and how do we try to dismantle the BRICS bloc before it becomes too strong. And unfortunately, so far, what they have done is make the BRICS stronger, at least relatively stronger, because of the fact that they have pushed Russia, China, Iran, and even India closer to each other. Yeah. By taking a very belligerent attitude. And I don't think Trump is going to improve that, because he's making very clear, America first, America will rule the world, and we don't necessarily want to interfere, but you still have to follow us, because, we'll control all the Western continent, the Western hemisphere, and wherever we have interest, we are going to push them very aggressively. That's been his position. So the BRICS is already expanding as a result of that. You can see Indonesia joining and all sorts of things happening. And India is worried because India can see the game that the US is playing in Bangladesh, not to mention Pakistan and even Afghanistan.
No, it is. In fact, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, is going to the inauguration. But Trump actually made it very clear that last year, when he was campaigning, our Prime Minister Modi did not come and meet him. And I don't know why, but his foreign policy team suggested that Biden is going to win.
Yeah.
So that is one of the reasons that he has the same kind of, friction with our government also. And he'll make it very clear, because he has immense immediate gratification in showing his emotions.
Yes, you see, I must say I was in a minority a few months ago in saying that Trump would probably win. And I know that my friends in the foreign relations community in India had trouble accepting that. They felt, Trump is so erratic and he's old. He has been practically impeached twice. He has all these legal cases against him. And then on the other hand, you have this attractive dynamic Kamala Harris, half Indian, etc. And yet, in my mind, Kamala Harris was not a viable candidate and would be very easily eliminated. And I had people in America, both Americans and people traveling there, telling me Kamala Harris is not going to win. Nobody really seriously wants to support her. So anyway, you have to get this feeling from the ground. Otherwise you read the newspapers, which are all pro-Democrat. I mean, the big major mainstream press. And then you end up saying, Trump looks like a losing case. But anyway, anybody who bet on Kamala Harris now is sorry, because Trump is not going to be very nice to them. The Europeans are going to eat, I'm not going to say what they'll eat, but it will be very hard for Europeans. Trump will lose no opportunity to basically humiliate them.
Yes.
And India, I think, still is in the good books of Trump. But, he's also bent on his tariff business, and he wants to show that he's not going to be, doing favors to anybody unless they are actually doing something for the US. That's it. You have to do what we tell you. And that's why one has to be careful about what will happen with sanctions, because we know that before they leave, the Biden crew want to impose new sanctions and particularly hit the Indian supply of Russian crude. They want to try to hit that so-called shadow fleet to make sure that India doesn't get that crude, which of course will be a very bitter parting shot at India from Biden. We hope that Trump will not really pursue that if he wants to repair relations to a certain extent with Putin.
Yeah, it's very interesting because India and most of the other Southeast Asian countries acting as laundry states for Russian oil. And Europe, in spite of the sanctions, is actually importing the Russian oil from India and the laundry states. That's a paradox. Why are you making it more difficult for yourself? But the thing which is very also very I actually bought a TV last year before November. And I had always, at a personal whim, been very like I'll never have a TV in my house. I knew Trump was going to win. I don't know why there was massive support for Kamala Harris there because she has, not that Trump has foreign policy expertise in Middle East, but she never took ownership of the vacuum which was created by the Democrats with the Gaza war. She never opened for dialogue. I am speaking and all of that rhetoric. And how the Columbia University protests happened, how they alienated Michigan Arabs. And so much of foreign policy PR campaigning going wrong with Kamala Harris. So she had no chance, to be honest. And also the misogyny of all of it. That was one point of it.
Yeah, let's face it, in a time of crisis and great peril, for Americans, it would be very difficult to trust a woman who has very limited experience. And on top of that, a woman who comes from minority communities. And let's face it, Kamala Harris was an absentee vice president. She never really did anything. She never took any initiative. She was essentially enjoying her time in the White House. And when push came to shove and she had to show what she was going to do, it was when they told her what is different between Biden and you, it was more like, well, same, but different. I mean, there was no research, no analysis. She upset a lot of people. She upset the left wing with regard to her attitude on Israel. She upset Christians by practically joking about God and Christianity. She basically put almost everyone against her. She only had the big billionaires from the West Coast and some of the liberals from the East Coast who were concerned that Trump would create problems for them. So they were supporting her, hoping she would keep the gravy train rolling, But otherwise, she was literally in a vacuum and people didn't even take her seriously in her immediate circle.
Yeah, I mean, just we are having the Mahakumbh right now. Just imagine, she mentioned about the Indian connection after Diwali, which is like 1 week before the election. And many of, that was a very, very bad choice on her part because she could have used it as a catalyst. She didn't. Like after Diwali, she remembers, oh, I'm half Indian. And then the Indians are there. What are you doing, sister? So the point is that that was something which was hilarious. Now, coming to another extreme narrative, which I also have a little problem with, is the Polish presidential candidate, Grzegorz Braun, who went and used a fire extinguisher on a menorah, and then he said, Jews in America, Jews in Israel, your time is done, you cannot teach us history. He's using the history card of Poland. Do you think that that is the European perception of political leaders? I don't know. Macron is busy defending if his wife is a man or a woman, but anyway. But do you think that Europe might change? Like Eastern Europe, Romania is under protest, all of them, Georgia is under protest.
Well, number one, I think Brown is a bit of a joke. I don't think he can get anywhere near the presidency. He is highlighting some aspects of the traditional Polish attitude, which is anti-Russian, anti-German, and anti-Jewish. So one doesn't know who they are left with. The Americans and the Brits, and maybe the French. That's about it. But they hate all their immediate neighbors. And as you know, they have had a big problem in a way with Jews, because even though the Germans were responsible for Auschwitz, the fact is that there had been a history of bad relations and even pogroms in Poland. The Jews were extremely numerous there. And anyway, it's a whole issue. But as you know, there is that, if forgetting about Brown, there is definitely that very big split between the pro-EU current government, headed by Mr. Tusk, and the conservative Catholic radical opposition, which is very anti-EU, very nationalistic, and very authoritarian. So that gives you the picture, but Poland is an exception. It's quite different from other countries. On the other hand, you have a lot of Eastern European countries which are really fed up with the EU now. They feel like poor relatives. They feel they are being mistreated and ignored. And that's why now you can see the trend in Hungary. Hungary is the leader, they are the PAC leader. But then you have Slovakia, you have even Austria, and you have Romania and Bulgaria, which are all saying enough of the EU arrogance, and particularly Ursula von der Leyen, the very prototype of the authoritarian German. So they are saying we will not go along. And now they are getting a shot in the arm because Trump and Elon Musk, who is his whippersnapper, they are all now giving them support. And to me, the most important thing is that they are also, the Trumpians are giving now not so hidden support to the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, because they would like Germany to be ruled by a nationalistic anti-EU party, and they don't care if the party is also anti-NATO, because Trump doesn't like NATO, and in my view will try to disengage as much as he can from NATO, telling Europeans, it's your job, pay for it and do what you want. I don't really have to support you. And likewise, I think there will be a push. There is already a big push to get rid of the Labour government in Britain. Trump, of course, doesn't want Starmer to be there because Starmer actually supported very actively the Democratic candidacy to the point of sending volunteers to help Kamala Harris. So Trump has practically unleashed Musk on Starmer, and now they are coming up with all the scandals about pedophilia within the British Parliament and the past of Mr. Starmer. And then again, they are pushing Farage, hoping that Farage can win and create at some point a nationalist government. So all that is showing that there is a real earthquake taking place in Europe and also likewise in the Middle East. And I think the earthquake may also reach South and East Asia.
Yeah, definitely. And David Lammy is in Israel right now. And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
David Lammy is in Israel.
Yes.
The UK foreign minister, in short, if I can speak it in that way. He's in Israel. There's a spy plane which is every day, like yesterday in the evening, one UK spy plane was coming from Cyprus over Gaza, giving intelligence. And I don't know, where is Dominic Cummings?
Yeah, well, that's something which I haven't heard either. But the British definitely have to do some repairing of relations with Israel, because after all, they are the ones who allowed the International Criminal Court to punish, to essentially, how would I say, issue a mandate of arrest, a warrant of arrest against Netanyahu and his former defense minister. And nowadays, the British public opinion is probably the most anti-Israeli in Europe, because they have been fed with so much information about the atrocities that took place in Gaza that they are really very, very upset. And most of the British press is extremely negative about Netanyahu. So the British government is really treading on thin ice, because they, insofar as, that's another issue on which the Americans and the British don't see eye to eye, because by and large, the American power structure has been fairly indifferent to what happened in Gaza, whereas the British have reacted very sensitively at the national level.
Yeah. And what do you think, now Cuba has joined, for example, South Africa's case against Israel in the ICJ. And what do you think that, though Poland initially said that, no, if Netanyahu comes, we are going to arrest him. Then Poland said that, no, we'll give him immunity. The Polish people are out there protesting that what is happening in our country. And then Braun is like, we will, use fire extinguisher. But the point is that, what do you think? ICJ had been always on, third world leaders.
Yeah, of course.
So, do you think that this case, and this is a question that is being asked by Shalaka, That what is your perspective on South Africa's case of genocide against Israel at ICJ? How likely it is that it would shape the atrocities that Israel is committing on Gaza? 85 people have been dead yesterday, like counting yesterday and today. Dr. Abu Hussein Safia is still missing. He's in Oxford prison now, severely critically injured. No one knows for how long and if he's a part of the prisoner exchange deal. But do you think that ICJ has any legitimacy? I'm not even talking about Rome Statute and jurisdiction.
Well, legitimacy is a matter of consent. I mean, if you are talking about legal legitimacy, they were set up under a protocol, which has been technically endorsed by a very large number of countries, to the point now that leading Israeli newspaper has published a list of countries where Israelis could safely go on vacation. Because, as you know, in many countries, especially soldiers, former or serving soldiers in the IDF, have now been alerted to the fact that they could be arrested in most countries in South America and in a number of other places. So this has become a real concern for Israelis. And as a result, you can imagine that the ICG has had some effect. Now, all these things are influenced by politics, as we know. And therefore, whatever happens now, especially if there is some sort of settlement, that will take some time because the ceasefire is not a settlement yet. It's just the first step. So depending upon what happens later, there may be some pressure for the ICG to relent and for South Africa not to pursue the case so that Israel is not under the gun. That will not be an easy thing to do. But clearly Trump has shown that, like most conservative Americans, he doesn't care about the ICG, and he thinks it's a nuisance and it should not exist. And the ICG came out of this very generous and utopian vision, mostly in Europe, that somehow the world has to be under one authority, which is based on human rights, and therefore anybody, whether it's Putin or Netanyahu or anyone, should be arrested if he commits what we consider to be crimes. But then that doesn't work. The world is not about to go under one government. It's not accepted. The big countries refuse it, and the small countries, unless they have no choice, they are not in favor of it either. And in Africa, the ICG is seen mostly as an organ to ensure the submission of African leaders. Yeah. So, you cannot keep it as a sort of a racist thing that targets people who belong to former colonies and who therefore can be arrested or at least punished in some way or another. So you have to either make it universal or it's not going to work. And in my view, under the Trump administration, a lot of these institutions will really decline, if not perish.
Let's say, we are living in episodes of Black Mirror right now. So one is, every day is like a new episode at Netflix. But let's see how it goes. And my last question to you at a personal level, sir, because you travel so much. In the past 1 year, or should I say from October 2023, since you have been traveling, what kind of sentimental shifts have you seen at the grassroots level in the countries, like, for example, Switzerland and Italy, France, Austria, all of that, when it comes to the Palestinian cause?
I would not feel comfortable giving a blanket opinion because it's so difficult to judge people who have such different views depending upon their backgrounds, religious convictions. Clearly, there is a sense, primarily in Europe, but in other parts of the world too, especially South America, for example, that the very sense that Israel was immune from most criticism because of the Shoah, because of the past, that is fading. People tend to see Israel more for its present actions and not so much because of the history that led to its creation. So as a result, I think Israelis are definitely, I would say in general, not popular with the majority of the populations. There is a sense that, of course, they have been victims. A lot of them, they have to defend themselves and all, but there is a sense that it's going too far. And particularly what people don't quite agree to or understand is the amount of support that Israel gets from the US and other leading powers. Because it seems so disproportionate with regard to other countries where bigger massacres take place and where there is very little intervention by the so-called global leaders. So there is a sense that, there is some injustice and some unfairness there. So that is a factor which I think should be taken into account, because clearly Israel is a small country. It is not easy to defend. It is very fragile, and it depends so much on US support. And with somebody like Trump at the helm, you really don't know what he will want to do in any particular situation,
Yeah.
So depending so heavily on a distant superpower, which has its own increasing problems, is a dangerous state of affairs. And unfortunately now, because of what has happened, Israel is certainly not in the good books of either Russia or China, which are the two other leading powers, and it still has to contend with deep-rooted Arab hostility. So we hope that something like the Abraham Accords at some point will take shape, but it's by no means a guarantee, because now Saudi Arabia has said that there's no way they are going to go into anything like that unless there is a proper Palestinian state. And we don't know how that will happen, because right now in Israel, nobody seriously wants a full-fledged Palestinian state.
Yeah, I mean, first they have to start with, though I'm not speaking for everyone, because there are activists like Mao Zedong and others who are taking the peace march, and the media itself is not giving them space. Haaretz has been heavily sanctioned, boycotted by the government. So there's a massive censorship in Israel. The hostage families are suffering, and they keep on talking with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and there's just their pleas falling on deaf ears. The last question that Sir Shalaka has asked, that though I don't agree with the question, but I will tell you what it is. There have been reports about increasing discussions with Indian soldiers working alongside or being deployed in Israel. Indian soldiers are deployed with the UN peacekeeping missions in Golan Heights and in Syria. Indian workers from Punjab and Haryana last year were taken to work in Israel, where they are, according to Yogi Adityanath, earning 1 lakh a month because the Thai workers fled when the October 7 took place. Nevertheless, could you please elaborate on the nature of the cooperation and what strategic or geopolitical implication it has for India and Israel, and taking into account the historic India-Palestine relationship?
I frankly have very little information on this, so it would be presumptuous of me to make any kind of statement. From what I understand, there are, of course, close relations, very cordial relations at various levels between Israel and India, for historic reasons as well, military cooperation, intelligence cooperation against some entities that are perceived as common enemies. Beyond that, clearly, if there is an opportunity for Indians to make a living by going to a country which offers them jobs, given the situation, I would expect them to accept, and for the government to support that. Look at how many have gone to Russia and have sometimes been killed because they were brought into areas close to the front. So, this is a very delicate issue. Can you prevent people from going somewhere to make a living if they don't have a job here? Many people are willing to take risks rather than, not having enough to live. So, in a way, this is something which also should be a matter of personal freedom. Beyond that, I think India has been quite careful, from what I see, about managing its relations with the other states in the region, and showing that they are certainly supporting a Palestinian state, and they want an end to hostility and atrocities on all sides, and that they refuse to take side to the level of actually, championing one side against the other. Whatever happens at the discrete bilateral diplomatic level is left, to those who are dealing with that. But by and large, I can see the improvement in relations with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, with the Emirates, which means that, of course, India was also quite supportive of, supportive. They were favorable to the Assad regime because it protected religious freedom and it reined in the Islamists. Now, of course, there is a very uncertain future in there. So clearly, India would prefer, in any event, a moderate, rather secular regime. But the Middle East is everything but secular. So you have to deal with the consequences of the social parameters. And I think that, well, as I said, prudence is always the best remedy in this case, because the moment you take sides and then things don't go as you expect, you can be a victim of what happened, So that's where there is a very delicate balance to be struck. And I trust that India can do that, as it has for so many years, with the understanding that it's not a party to the conflict and it's not part of West Asia. Therefore, it is, in a way, it can be more detached.
Yeah, in fact, our Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, actually said recently that India finds itself in a unique position where it can talk with members of the BRIC countries, with South Korea, with Iran, with Russia, with Israel, with the other Middle Eastern countries, which many countries do not find themselves in that position too right now. So with this, thank you so much for the privilege of your time, and looking forward to see you in person soon. And thank you for giving so much of historical insights into every answer that you gave, because I never realized where the time went.
That's very kind of you. Neither did I.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining in.